going to compliment you the entire time. He might be a little fresh.
The keystone in the arch of Star Wars.
It's a show that I dearly love and admire, so thanks for having me.
Sorry, I'm getting like emotional.
And you got this hulking, scary dude with the big nose and the perfect hair.
I understand. This is a safe space. This is a safe space between you and I and all of your viewers.
Cassie and Jim and teacher people are like, no. I can literally hear people that go, no.
Rogue One was awesome. I love the Han Solo movie, and then of course I love The Mandalorian.
And like getting to talk to fans face to face and learn their names and just, get to hear their stories.
And in the world of Star Wars, there's a bunch of people who look different. There are different species. There's lizard men. There's psychic baby swamp monsters.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
And also you get Ewoks, and I am definitely a lover of Ewoks.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Yes, it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I'm your host, Pete Fletzer. I don't know why I do this intro every week on the Patreon version of the show, because, hey, if you're hanging out with us, you know a little bit about the show. I just want to say thank you very much for hanging out with us. It's we are recording tonight on the eve of Book of Boba Fett episode or chapter 6, the Filoni episode. So hopefully you're hanging out with us and getting psyched up for Book of Boba Fett. Tonight, I am really excited to bring you an interview with a gentleman named Dan Casey. Dan is with Nerdist. He has written a couple books, 100 Things, was it 100 Things Every Star Wars Fan Needs to Know and Do Before They Die, which seems like a little bit of pressure, I think, but we'll probably talk a little bit about that. But if you are into anything fandom, any of the major fandoms, you've probably seen some of the stuff that Dan's been involved in. So let me just stop talking and I'll bring Dan in. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. I loved that intro. That was so like appropriately dramatic. It got me hyped up for the show.
Well, good. It's working. It's working. So Dan, thank you for hanging out with us. As I was saying, we are recording the night before the second to last Book of Boba Fett episode.
Yes, Fettmas Eve.
Fettmas Eve. Yes, it's man, I am going to miss that. So any conversation that we end up talking about with Book of Boba Fett, which we probably will probably be wrong. I mean, I think we can expect to be wrong about any conversation there. But Dan, for people who don't know you, maybe give us a little bit of your background.
Yes, I'd be happy to. For people that don't know me, I grew up in the Boston area, and then 2 weeks after graduating college, hopped in my car to drive out to Los Angeles for a recession-proof career in entertainment, and somehow stumbled my way into the world of entertainment journalism. And I've now been with Nerdist and Legendary Digital Networks for a decade. It was a decade as of this past November, which is wild to think about, especially in internet years. But basically, it all stems from a life of reading comics, playing video games, and overthinking fictional worlds, which I was then able to fortunately trick someone into paying me to do professionally, which I pinch myself every day because it doesn't feel real sometimes. But so I make a lot of videos at Nerdist. I used to do a lot more writing. These days I'm more on the video side, working behind the scenes. But yeah, it's just fun to always get to geek out about the stuff that I'd be nerding out about anyway with my friends and family.
I think I'm not gonna be able to let my son listen to this episode because he'll be like, "See, Dad, it's okay if I play Fortnite and watch movies all day because I'm gonna make a career out of it."
Yeah, he's preparing for the future.
That's right.
I know.
All right, future-proof career. Well, that's pretty wild to have jumped into this 10 years ago. And as you said, I mean, 10 years in internet years is huge. We'll get into your Star Wars story in a minute, but maybe it might be interesting to start talking a little bit about this current state of fandom. Because when I say fandom, I generally mean all the big ones. MCU, right. One of your books was MCU, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, whatever is big. And 10 years ago, that was sort of the things were starting to become kind of real. I always talk about how, I was in, I was back when Phantom Menace came out 20 plus years ago, the internet speed was so slow, and YouTube didn't exist. But in the past 10 years, not only has fandom really exploded online, but it's the dominant force.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see, especially from when I came into this as an industry, just how fandom has become the global, like, dominant force in popular culture. It is just shaping the world around us in really meaningful ways. And it's interesting because, it's been facilitated by sort of the rise in things like social media. Because, not to say that fan communities have existed since time immemorial, like, long before the internet was a thing. Like, you think back to like the very first Comic-Cons and things like that. It was just a space for like-minded people to geek out. Even in the early days of the internet, you had like Usenet groups and listservs and things like that.
Right.
But now it is easier than ever to hop on any platform and find people that share the same deeply nerdy niche interests as you. And you can find your tribe, you can find your community, and you can find a group of people to, just share that passion with. It's not, you don't have to, it's not like fandom and like being a nerd about something is not like the dirty word that it used to be. It's kind of like, it used to be, you'd be like, oh, you like Star Wars, you like Marvel, it's kind of nerdy. Now it's perhaps one of the most mainstream things you can do. And that's pretty cool to see.
It is. I mean, it's funny. We talk about, and one of the objectives of my show is to sort of capture that moment when two Star Wars fans meet, right? And it used to be you'd walk through your local shopping center and you might see one Star Wars shirt and you'd be like, hey, if I get in line at the comic book store with that guy, I'm going to go talk to him about Star Wars. Now it's become kind of it's become. Even people who aren't Star Wars fans wear Star Wars shirts now, right? When do you think that kind of started to happen? When did fandoms like Marvel, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars start to become mainstream?
I want to say probably with that, I want to say it probably coalesced with the rise of smartphones. So I'd say like that period from like 2008, which coincidentally, first iPhone, Iron Man movie comes out. He's still using, he's talking about MySpace in that movie.
That's right.
But really accelerated probably, I want to say by 2012, because you've had several years of Marvel movies at that point. You've had these sort of legacy franchises like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, even Star Wars. Like there was these online communities just obsessed about them.
Right.
But that's when you started to see more things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram really start to take off. And you have this supercomputer in your pocket that you can just like immediately talk about it with or spend endless hours scrolling about it. So I feel like it's that window because especially with that first phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you got people to buy into one of the sort of like nerdiest things traditionally, like comic books,
right?
A serialized comic book universe on a massive scale. You got people to adopt that on a massive scale. And then I think from there, it just became sort of open season. Like, not to say that that was the only sort of nerdy property there. You saw people really, there was that big rush in the world of YA lit, where like everyone was trying to find the next Hunger Games because, when you find these things that translate so well to screen, it just democratizes it for people that maybe didn't know the source material and opens it up to a wider array of people. And, that's when you get that, some people, not gatekeeping per se, but you get you get some folks that feel like, oh, I kind of miss those days when it was just like our little thing.
Yeah.
But those days are long gone, and you have to find like these new small pockets of fandom as they pop up to feel that again, if that's like the feeling you're chasing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point, because I think you're right. Gatekeeping as a practice, if you will, sort of did start to happen in tandem with that, right? Because you suddenly had this new group. I mean, look, I joke about it because I was a Metallica fan back in the 80s, and then they became big, and I was like, it's not my Metallica, and how can you? But you do kind of. I definitely see where that is, and that's the case. You see it with Star Wars, especially because of its age, because it's been around for 45 years. there are people who believe that it's quote unquote their Star Wars, or
Mhm.
or you're not a fan. How does somebody go about kind of dealing with that? What's your advice? That because I mean, I spend way too much time on Twitter. I see the arguments, I see the outbursts, and honestly, there's, in a way, sometimes it's on both extremes. You have the people who are, you're not a fan because you weren't there back in the day, and then you have sort of that other, hey, old fan, this is not yours anymore, which is really not even a, that's not a great argument to that. But how would you recommend it? What's sort of like the advice you might give to somebody who's been in the digital space, the digital fandom space for 10 plus years?
So it's interesting because it's a double-edged sword, because I love what things like Twitter, for example, do. They enable this unique access to creators, to commentators, to critics, to fans all over the world, provides them a platform to speak to each other.
Mm-hmm.
But, with that, there's parasocial relationships where people feel like they are friends with someone just because they liked their tweet or something. There is a sense of ownership as a fan that some folks feel. They feel a sense of entitlement that, oh, like, I'm a fan of this, it is mine. Like, when you put it out into the world, it is mine. And they feel a sense of ownership over a creator in a way that can cross certain boundaries. It's the problem is, like, it used to be a platform, and I think a lot of them used to be platforms to have conversations, but that's not really the world we live in anymore. It feels, especially platforms like Twitter, feel much more fractious, much more divided. It feels like a lot of people yelling the word nuance into a wind tunnel most of the time. And so when you get these conversations where someone is gatekeeping, where someone is complaining, look, they're entitled to their own opinion. But by that same token, you do not have to engage with that person. The block button is your friend. The mute button is your friend, because then they really are just screaming into the void. But if you do try to engage them in good faith, I've found that, like, a lot of times when in the past someone would leave a nasty comment, I would reply something like, hey, thanks for watching. I'm sorry you feel that way. And they would be like, oh my God, I didn't think you would respond to this. I don't know why I did that. I guess I was having a bad day. And so I think there's a certain anonymity to the internet that makes people feel entitled to maybe speak in a way they might not otherwise if they're having that conversation face to face. Some people might be rude in person, but I don't know. I feel like I try to take a kill 'em with kindness approach when I encounter something like that. And, the world is such a big place. Don't let one loud jerk ruin something that you care about. Just mute them, take room, do what you can to make it an enjoyable place for yourself, and just find people that do want to have conversations with you about the thing that you want to talk about.
Yeah. The phrase I use all the time is don't yuck someone else's yum. And it's so much easier to scroll by something you disagree with. And it's funny because I think the Star Wars community specifically, and it's only because it's what I'm a part of. And I'm sure if I was a Trekkie, or if I was, deep into Tolkien lore or something like that, I would see the same sort of things. But, I have opinions about Rise of Skywalker, for example. And yeah, I mean, it's great to have as a podcast conversation, but in 280 characters, it's impossible to have that nuanced conversation. And I can see where somebody who loves that movie may take it as me saying that was garbage and your opinion is wrong. And I think that's where the line is. That's kind of where I find it is the people who lead with "you're wrong" and I'm going to tell you why, or "you're wrong" and I'm not even going to tell you why because I'm a keyboard coward. Right. But it is much easier, I think, I like what you're saying about sort of curating your own experience, because there is no real reason to why, if Dan Casey posts, the Rise of Skywalker, my favorite Star Wars movie, I could say I disagree, but why? I mean, why even do that, right? Because we both, hey, you love a Star Wars movie, I love a Star Wars movie. So.
For the record, I won't be posting that anytime soon. No offense to anyone for whom it's their favorite. But yeah, no, it is one of those things where sometimes I think the problem with a platform like Twitter is really any social media platform is people take a tweet that you could have just rattled off while you were folding your laundry or just like in the restroom or something. Just a really like top line thought that does not merit something you would just say in the ether of your brain.
Right.
And they take that as the definitive statement that defines you as a person and your views to a T.
Right.
And it often takes the form of this sort of like bad faith argument where they are then being like, well, you said this. And like, yeah, I said this, but like, this is part of I can keep going on. There's context to this that does not fit in a 280 character tweet. So, sometimes I'm definitely down to like go back and forth with someone and have a discussion. The way I try to think about it is I want to be critical without being nasty. Right. Like if I'm just trying to bag on something or dunk on something, that's different. And like, that's not me looking to have a meaningful argument, but like,
right.
If I'm trying to have like critical discourse, that is a very different thing. And I think that sort of gets lost in the shuffle because again, people are like, oh, well, you said this, so I'm just going to pile on and take this in a different direction.
Yeah. Yeah. That's smart. It is. And it's to your point. It is. People do tend to, that is you, that if that's the first tweet I see from you, that's your personality, right? It's that first impression kind of thing. For sure. So you've been with Nerdist for 10 years. How does and maybe how does Nerdist manage the dearth of information? Because 10 years ago, there's a handful of you out there of really interesting entertainment. I could be wrong, and maybe it's just because of where I live in the space that I spend in the digital space, but it feels like it's an incredibly competitive space, specifically in entertainment. How does Nerdist sort of carve their own piece out there?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question because that's sort of like the question we have to ask ourselves every day, every year. Like, how do we set ourselves apart from the crowd? There are so many fantastic places that you can go to get your information about Star Wars, about Marvel, about whatever you're nerding out about. And as much as we try to be all things to all people, it's impossible. So what we try to do is figure out what we can do well. And so we sort of boiled that down to kind of 3 core principles, and that's being irreverent, intelligent, and inclusive. We want to approach things from an intelligent, analytical, critical point of view. We want to be irreverent. We don't want to be too stuffy about it. I mean, we had one of our writers, Michael Walsh, spoke with a basketball coach to analyze the game that they play at the beginning of High School Musical. So like we want to have fun when we're overthinking it. We want to be inclusive as well. So we want to make sure that we are giving a platform to the wide variety of voices out there from all different walks of life who want to nerd out about this, the same stuff that we're nerding out about. So that's what we try to do. And again, it also, to a certain degree, boils down to personality because everyone might have a different thought in their head when they think of the Nerdist voice, but we try to make it embody those 3 principles. We want to make sure that people are coming to us. They know they're going to leave, hopefully having learned something and maybe laughed a little bit. And then we try to build up different people in our community, whether they're writers, on-camera personalities, people behind the scenes, so that they can really shine through. And we want to make sure that's sort of the ethos that goes into everything that we do, because everyone is getting the same press release. Everyone's getting the same 3 like sentences from an interview that is then going through the like aggregation content mill. And we all have to figure out what can we say about it and why should you listen? And that's frankly a difficult question to answer, but we try to do so by putting our stamp on it.
Excellent. And it's work. As I said at the top, I've been a fan of Nerdist for at least probably since you've been there, and it is hard to keep that attention, and so I think that's a great way to do it. And I think inclusivity is a great way to an important thing to be thinking about, and especially because, again, as we were saying, in the digital space, in the online space, that's where some of the challenges I think come into the conversation, and you don't need to, it doesn't need to be, a banner you fly on the front of your Twitter page, but as long as that essence is there, I think that's really critical. So.
Yeah. And thank you. We try to make sure that we're doing the best we can to give opportunities to as many folks as possible to talk about this stuff, because as much as I love hearing myself yammer on about Star Wars or Marvel or what have you, there's so many other people out there that have cool things to say, and I want to be able to give a platform for those people to say those things as well.
Awesome. Well, let me give you an opportunity to yammer on about Star Wars. That's why I had you on the show. So, Dan, tell me a little bit about your first experiences with Star Wars, how it became part of your life, and how it kind of drove you to where you are now.
Absolutely. So my first experience with Star Wars was 1997. I was down on Cape Cod. It was, I believe, the summertime. I don't remember exactly. I'm pretty sure it was 97 based on the little timeline. When you're a kid, every year feels roughly the same until you're old enough to look at a calendar. So I remember my dad came home one day with this really cool looking box set. It was 3 VHS, and it was the black and gold Star Wars special edition VHS box set that came out, I believe, in connection with they're starting to release these special editions in theaters and things like that. And I was just blown away. I had grown up to that point reading comic books because my dad collected comics since he was a kid. So my basement growing up was like this Library of Alexandria of just like really old comics dating back to the 1950s. And it was just it just drew me in instantly because it had all these different things that I was really interested in. I got interested in anime from a very young age, and from there Japanese film. And then, you could see those influences in Star Wars, but even just on its face, this very like almost not a fairy tale, but like this, it's a lot of people call it space fantasy. And that's with Star Wars, like you just get sucked into this tale with these like archetypal characters and such rich world building. And, it's a world that feels like it's existed for a long time. And from there, I was just like really intrigued, and I loved the movies. I never really got into the expanded universe too much. I had a bunch of friends. I think I was a little intimidated because I felt like I was pretty into the world of comics. And I was like, I had friends that were like, how can you keep up? I was like, well, they're in my house. I've been reading them for years and years. I didn't know where to start when it came to the Star Wars novels. But I did play some of the video games because I was a big gamer. So that was a nice access point into characters like Kyle Katarn, for example.
Oh yeah.
But for the most part, it was just, I really just loved the movies. And then I remember going to see the prequels in theaters and being like, these are different. These feel different. And like, I still don't, they're not my favorite, but I appreciate them now that I'm older and like have considered what they were trying to do. When I see like, when you see like, here's the big through line. And I think back to that George Lucas quote after seeing The Phantom Menace, I may have overdone it in a few places.
Yeah.
And so, my long-winded point being that box set was my introduction to the world of Star Wars, and it just kind of fostered a lifelong appreciation for that world in particular. But I would say that, it really wasn't until writing the book that I really got to dig deep and think about some of these other aspects of the Star Wars universe that I really admired and really liked. And for me, it always comes back to world building and these cinematic influences and, some of the weirder parts of the Star Wars universe. I always found myself, I was a big Muppet fan when I was a kid. So I always loved all the weird creature effects and puppets. Like, love Max Rebo when he showed up on Book of Boba Fett. Lost my mind. If anything happens to him in these final 2 episodes, I'm sure we'll find out that right after this drops that he dies tragically to save Boba. Big shootout at the cantina, but it's just it's been something that's been a part of my life for a long time. And just one of those things that's always felt like it's been there as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about Muppets. I feel like there's something about I'm gonna venture a guess. Were you also into like behind the scenes things and sort of movie creation as well?
Sometimes it really depended. Like I was really into it with Lord of the Rings, for example, because I remember they had an exhibit at a museum where they like showed you like how the cameras worked in like forced perspective. Cause the first time I saw like all of these actors together on like a red carpet or something, I was like, wait a minute, something's amiss here.
Right. how did he match the height of Gandalf? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting because there is like, I think there's something about Star Wars, and it's funny. I often think about Star Wars, and my first thing is I've told this story before. I presented at a very small local science fiction convention years ago when I was working for Star Wars Galaxy, and I led off by saying Star Wars is not science fiction, which of course I do remember like vividly. There were a couple of fans in the back who like literally got up and left. They're like, all right, I'm not sitting through this. But I always think science fiction first when I think Star Wars, even though it's fantasy to me. I think of the science fiction side. I forget every single time how much of it is monsters and fantastical. And I mean, Book of Boba Fett, you had, the creature that looked like a Harryhausen effect come out of the sand, right? And what was it, the first episode? And I forget that it's as much monsters as it is force and spaceships. And I think it's the fact that anything can show up in a Star Wars adventure, whether it's a movie, book, comic, or TV show. Do you think when you think of Star Wars, what are sort of the images that come to mind for you?
It's a lot of what you described there. I picture these like space samurai and wizards waging war in outer space against these sometimes galactic backdrops. I think like political maneuvering. I think sort of like space opera on the grandest scale playing out over the course of decades. But when I just think about it at its core, I think adventure, because, you think back to the original movie where it's just farm boy leaving his home with a couple of quirky robots to realize that he has a much bigger role to play, and the world is so much bigger than his small town. And that's something I always really resonated with. I grew up in a town called Wakefield, Massachusetts, about 25,000 people, so not like super tiny, especially compared to some folks I know, but it felt small. Everyone I knew and like went to high school with, a lot of them were like, yeah, we're just gonna like buy a house here or like get married and move back to the hometown. I'm like, that's not what I want. I wanted adventure. That's something I always wanted. I always wanted to travel and to experience the world. And I think that sort of aspect where, Luke Skywalker going on this incredible journey, that is something I was like, wow, that's awesome. Like, look at all the, like, look, you lost a hand along the way. It's not all going to be great, but for the most part, as an only child, I don't have to worry about kissing a sister. It's mostly going to be good.
It's mostly. I mean, if I followed your history, you went on to study, was it Japanese culture and you spent time in Tokyo?
Japanese history. I spent time in Kyoto and Tokyo.
Yeah. So you got the adventure part. You got the travel so far, and you still got plenty to go if as you have those opportunities, which is wild. And I think it's funny that you talk about that, because so many people that I talk to on the show talk about how there was something about Luke's sort of call to adventure. And while I think for some people like yourself, it's very present, but I think ultimately that's probably why Star Wars works for people, because whether you think about it or not, you probably do want to, go on beyond whatever you have, whether it's good or bad. You want to go beyond, and Luke has captured that incredibly well without hitting you over the head with it, I think.
Yeah, he's such a charming doofus in the first movie where, he is your way into this world. Everyone else seems to know exactly what's going on with all of these smugglers and, princesses, secret messages, ancient orders of wizards with laser swords, and people that can choke you with their mind. And he's just like, I helped my uncle harvest moisture all day, every day. The only thing I wanted was to go to town to buy some power converters, but he said no. So it's just like, great. I'm at home doing chores. There's so much going on in the world around me. It's super relatable. It's almost like he is the Peter Parker of the galaxy far, far away. Peter Parker, Spider-Man, probably my favorite character in Marvel, because he is someone that has to deal with all of this other nonsense, who has all of this unexpected responsibility and legacy thrust upon him that he has to deal with. But with Luke as well, he's just he's just a farm boy trying to make good, and then suddenly finds himself inducted into this ancient order of knights and dealing with his dad's mess to clean up.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because let's talk a little bit about Star Wars storytelling and where it is, because I hadn't thought of it until you were just expressing it there so well, and that might be why Din Djarin is such an appealing character, right? I think because, and I think we're seeing it with some of the commentary about Book of Boba Fett. It's not the Boba Fett we expected, right? And who knows what's going to happen in the next 2 episodes, but clearly not the Boba Fett they expected. But the great thing for Din Djarin was there was nothing to expect, and I mean he's more clueless than Luke was in Star Wars. I mean, the fact that he asked Luke if he's a Jedi when he walks in after slashing down all those robots at the end of at the end of season 2. But the future of Star Wars storytelling it seems like we've sort of been given a blueprint that we're going to be moving forward heavily on television. What are your thoughts on that? And as somebody who grew up with the films, as you know, all of us did until 2019 when Mando came out. How does that strike you as a way to tell these stories?
I think it's a really interesting direction to take. Obviously, I'll always enjoy a well-crafted Star Wars film, but we're in a place right now where studios are willing to put the money behind a Star Wars show to make it look and feel as good as it needs to, as good as you would want it to feel. But also, the technology is there. It's not going to look chintzy. It's not going to look like you're not going to see the wires.
Right.
You might see a guy's jean leg or a Starbucks cup every now and then. Mistakes happen. Let's say it's an artifact or from the future, but I think it lets you really take your time with certain characters and tell some of these stories. There are certain stories that I think are worth being condensed into that just like tight 2-hour cinematic experience. There's like nothing that can really replicate that thrill. But with Mando in particular, you really get this character who's kind of like a blank slate, like this Clint Eastwood man with no name character. And over the course of 2 seasons, they've built in so much humanity into his journey as he reckons with his legacy, with his found family, with the strictures of orthodoxy and what that means for him. Is that something that even resonates with him? Is the way that he wants to follow? And yeah, I don't think you could really accomplish that same goal to the same degree if you just limited that to a movie, because if there's a couple years in between each entry as well, it just kind of loses some of that poignancy. The serialized nature of it even harkens back to some of the stuff that really resonated with George Lucas when he was first coming up with Star Wars, and that's like old Flash Gordon serials that would play. So it's nice to see, and I think it's extremely in the Star Wars tradition. I think sometimes it can feel smaller by nature because it's on television, because you're not watching it on a screen that's like 6 stories tall. But I think when it's done well, it can be a really transcendent experience for Star Wars fans.
Yeah, I think the fact that they're able to tell these expanded stories, and it's interesting again. By the time this drops, we'll have a lot more information. But the way I'm personally a fan as a storyteller of the way they're telling this sort of Book of Boba Fett. I mean, it's right there in the name, the Book of Boba Fett. I said it before. It kind of feels like it really is. It's written. It's given to you like a book. You would get one chapter which was a flashback, then you'd get a chapter in current time, you get a flashback, then you get an interlude with, I mean, Chuck Wendig's Aftermath series had those interludes, and that's kind of what this episode with Mando was about. And so I think it's I'm enjoying it as a way to tell the stories, and it allows for a bigger sort of way to tell the story. Do you think they're going down an MCU sort of path where they're going to take all these different things and kind of go together? And which kind of big bad guy do you think they're going for, if they're going that direction?
For sure. I think it's going to take a twofold approach there with this sort of MCUification of the galaxy far, far away. I do think to a certain degree that is what is happening, because if you're Disney, you look at your most profitable asset right now, and that is the Marvel franchise. Then you look at Star Wars, which should have knocked it out of the park on everything they've done since 2015. in the same sort of way that Marvel has critically and at the box office. And you probably want to be creating that sense of connectedness because you want people to be hanging on every new entry that drops. And I think they are, but I think by making everything feel like must-see appointment television, movie going, etc., you can accomplish that. So I do think they've even said that shows like The Mandalorian and Rangers of the New Republic and Book of Boba Fett are all going to coalesce, and they might even have some like big crossover events or like tie into a larger event down the line. I think very clearly the main villain they're teeing us up for, because we find out that, spoiler alert if you haven't seen chapter 5 yet, that Din Djarin did not summarily execute Moff Gideon, which would be pretty out of character for him if he did.
Right.
So he's still lurking out there. I don't trust the New Republic has their stuff together to keep him in custody for very long. Right. I think those are going to culminate in some sort of mission to retake Mandalore ultimately, which he will probably take none too kindly to. But I could see them also tying in a larger villain like Admiral Thrawn or someone further down the line. I feel like they need to, Moff Gideon's great, but we've seen him. We've already had battles with him. I think, with Star Wars, I think like the rule of two, there's always going to be someone else behind the scenes. And obviously we know that he's working for Mecha Palpatine by the time we get to The Rise of Skywalker, but I'd love to see someone else in between, like some other like malevolent figure, or maybe just even someone that we haven't seen before, because that's what I'm excited about. Why I think I liked Mandalorian so much is because it felt like an aspect of the galaxy far away we hadn't seen as much. I liked I liked seeing a story that wasn't about people named Skywalker or Palpatine. It was nice to see this different aspect, because for the past several decades, those were the main people we were concerned with, and rightly so. But if it's an entire galaxy, show me the galaxy. And that's why I'm excited for things like the High Republic, for example.
Yeah, because it also and I think that was one of the issues with the prequels, right? And like you said, it's interesting how my mind has changed dramatically on the prequels. I've said it before, I walked out of Phantom Menace and was like, yeah, I don't know what I just saw, and I don't think I liked it. Now, it's weird to say, but Phantom Menace may be one of my top 5 Star Wars movies, and so it's interesting how that comes around. It's really, it's wild to watch the way these stories are coming together. But where I was going with the prequels was, you knew how it was going to end, right? I mean, if you had the soundtrack for the Phantom Menace, you also knew that Qui-Gon was going to die in the first movie, but that's a whole other bizarre situation. But you kind of knew where the story was going. And so that is one of the great things about Mandalorian. Even, Book of Boba Fett, we don't know how Boba Fett's story ends. So, we will by the time this drops, but we don't know where it ends overall. And so that's exciting. And because it really does have that anything can happen kind of feel, which I think has been missing from Star Wars. Even the expanded, although I was never a big expanded universe person, like great expanded universe books like Leia, Princess of Alderaan, like great book, but you knew what was going to happen with most of the characters. So they became sort of backstory versus forward story, if you will. Right?
Yeah, it's always like an odd balancing act between wanting to fill in gaps in the canon and making it feel like needless minutia, or ultimately purposeless. I might be in the minority on this, but with Rogue One, as cool as it was to see like Darth Vader's lightsaber glow in that hallway and just slash people to ribbons when you realize that it's leading directly into the first moments of A New Hope.
Right.
I would have been fine without that, because it felt like, okay, you told this really like fascinating story about a suicide mission for one of the most important aspects of this rebellion. How did they get the plan to the Death Star? That's a really cool question to answer. But then it just felt like that, and that's where I raise an eyebrow over the sort of like MCU ification of Star Wars. I don't need to see how what happened like the 6 seconds before every single other entry. I
Right.
like having the sense that some time passes, and like their job as storytellers, my job as an audience member, to pick up on those clues, to piece it together. And I think you can have more fun there without having everything so rigidly defined, like down to the minute.
Right. No, I would definitely. I think that is a challenge that they face, and I think what's interesting, and I love your perspective. Were you a fan of the Clone Wars and the Rebels animated shows as well?
I've grown to enjoy them.
Mhm.
I have not seen all of them because when they first came out, I just found the animation so
Very different, right?
I just didn't like the style. I found it very aesthetically displeasing,
Mm.
and it took me a long time to sort of put that bias aside and be like, "Oh, they actually tell a really thoughtful, worthwhile story
Yeah.
that retroactively will probably make you appreciate things like the prequels even more because they do fill in those gaps in a much more meaningful way."
Yeah.
So it's like that. I think that's an example of doing it well. But I sure do wish that they had taken a different aesthetic approach to it, because I don't know. I wrote it off for a long time because I was like,
Yeah.
this Yoda is disgusting. I don't want to look at him.
No, I agree with it. That was what, there were two things that took me a while. First of all, the Clone Wars movie, I could not get into that at all. Second of all, that style, you're 100% right. And I don't know what I expected for animation style for Star Wars, but wasn't that. And now again, it's this really interesting thing, and maybe it's because it's a 45-year-old story and because the lore is starting to connect, but it's I've finally been able to get by the look and live in the story. And the stories, as you were saying, I mean, they're really great stories. It's just I think part of the challenge they face too is you have sort of the different strata of Star Wars fans. You have, people like me who spend way too much time thinking about it, talking about it. Then you have people, and I always use the example of my dad, who, he's 75 years old. He's a big Star Wars fan, but he never watched that stuff. So when my biggest concern, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, is they've been able to, I believe, introduce characters like Bo-Katan and Ahsoka Tano in a way that is fantastic for fans like you and I, who are like, I know who that is. And meanwhile, my dad can be like, oh, that Jedi was kind of cool, and that lady in the blue armor, that was cool. She's going to be a problem, and do you think that's something that they are going to have to continue to balance, or do you think they figured out a good way to tell those stories?
I think they still have to balance it for sure, because if you're just having someone show up for the sake of fan service, then that is kind of where it gets a little tricky. It's what people kind of like knock the MCU for, where someone shows up in the post-credit scene. You're like, okay, who the hell was that? If I haven't read 50 years of comics, would I know this person?
Right.
In some cases, the answer is still no. But with that, I think like The Mandalorian, I thought did a good job with characters like Bo-Katan and Ahsoka, because you get the sense there's history there. You might not know what it is, but you get the sense that this person, it's not their first time appearing. Like they are being given a certain level of like gravitas, and there's a weight to their arrival in the story that moves it forward, not just like some random person that shows up who happens to be wearing Mandalorian armor or holding a lightsaber.
Right.
So I think they're doing a solid job of it thus far. But like, then there's other stuff like Chrysanthemum on the Book of Boba Fett, where all you need to see is a badass Wookiee gladiator with electric knuckle dusters who's just ready to bring the pain. You don't need to know that he appeared in the Star Wars comics first and used to pal around with whoever, but you just instantly know. You're like, I don't care who this is. All I know is he's my new favorite character.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So and that's where I think the iconography of Star Wars really helps, because a Mandalorian just looks awesome. Like they just look cool. And when you see another Mandalorian, from the show that they are far and few between. So you're always like, who is this? I thought all the Jedi were gone. Who is this? Yep. So it creates these cool moments where you don't have to have decades or have watched 7 seasons of an animated series to understand the full meaning. But if you have, it's even cooler for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I won't go into it, but that's where the Rise of Skywalker missed for me, right? There was an opportunity to pay off, and I think that's what the Disney shows are doing extremely well is I have friends over at a podcast called Bro Axiom, and they do a great job of covering comics and a lot of things, but comics is one of their areas, and they always talk about how there's just these little payoffs, and the people who have read the book. Look, I don't read all the novels. I can't keep up with all the comics. But when I do see these little things, it's enough to be like, so here we go. Thank you for hanging out with us for 40 years. Here's that thing from that book you read in 1998, right? So that's kind of cool. And to your point, they're doing it in a way. Chris Anton, I think, is a fantastic example. Big badass Wookiee, really cool. I want to see more of him. Oh, it turns out he's been in 10 different comics and whatever. And that's the thing of the comics, though. There's so much going on there that I just can't even keep up with it. I'm like, I'm okay with that at this point. It's nice to know I can go get it, but it's definitely hard to keep up with. So that's cool. Well, Dan, I come to this point in the show where I have a 10 question segment. It's kind of like Inside the Actors Studio. There's 10 Star Wars questions. There's no wrong answers. Okay. I won't judge you. People listening absolutely will, because
of course,
social media.
Star Wars fans,
yeah,
it doesn't sound like them.
Hit him at Dan Casey. Tell him why he's wrong. But no, I'm just kidding. So
no, please
don't do that. Don't. He's a nice guy. But I'll just ask you this question. You can give as long or short an answer as you like, and let's jump to it. So, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
My favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book? That is a great question. In recent years, it's been The Mandalorian because it got me excited about Star Wars again. But my real answer is A New Hope, the original Star Wars, because it just sets the stage so well, introduces you to all of these iconic archetypal characters, and just tease up so many wonderful mysteries and amazing moments and just jaw-dropping sequences, like the first time I saw the Death Star destroy Alderaan, or the first time you see a Jedi mind trick. It's just this incredible foray into this world that, heretofore you likely knew nothing about. And I think, it's as a student of history, as a fan of this world, I have to bring it back to where it all began.
Yeah. And it's interesting because my 9-year-old son, who popped in before we started, his moment, Star Wars is just a part of his culture, right? He won't have that big, oh my gosh, what is that big ball that's blowing up a planet kind of moment, but he's getting it in different ways. I've told this story before where he was a Clone Wars fan. You and I couldn't get into the anime. Like, that was his entry point. And when the clones turned, that was his I am your father moment. That was like, he didn't make that connection to the movie.
Wow.
And so when, in season 7, when Order 66 comes, he was devastated. But that's great that Star Wars continues to deliver those moments to who's ever there. But I love that point you make about, seeing Star Wars for the first time. And it's truly amazing. It really is. What's your favorite non-Star Wars movie?
As in
any movie that's not a Star Wars movie.
Any movie that's not a Star Wars movie. That is a much harder question. One that I should probably have an answer locked and loaded. So I'm going to just say the first thing that I thought of, because it's probably my gut telling me this is the answer, and that is Princess Mononoke, Studio Ghibli, Hayao Miyazaki.
Yeah.
Another 1997 classic, very formative year, clearly. I remember my mother knew that I was interested in anime, and Hayao Miyazaki is supposed to be the Walt Disney of Japan, and so she took me to see this this animated movie, thinking like, okay, it'll be a fun like adventure fantasy film,
right?
And within the first 5 minutes, you see this guy, Prince Ashitaka. His arm gets possessed by the taint of a demon boar, and he pulls back the string of an arrow and lets it loose, and it rips a guy's arms clean off. And I'm like, oh my God, what is going on here? This is amazing. You can do that in animation? And it just blew my brain apart. I was like, wow, this is so cool. And it just becomes this sweeping eco fable about like sort of the folly of man and like what we're doing to the environment. And it's just this really just engrossing saga. And, you know, a lot of those themes do cross back over to Star Wars, but I think I always trace back, you know, my first anime that like really got me into it was Sailor Moon, but like truly Princess Mononoke was just on another level in terms of expanding my young mind as to the possibilities that were out there and having such incredible creature designs as well.
Yeah. How did you respond to Star Wars Visions?
I loved Star Wars Visions. I thought it's such a cool idea. I think an anthology series is such a perfect format for Star Wars, especially an animated anthology series, because there you're not really constrained by budget or physics in the same way that you would be in live action.
Right.
And I think it also just opens up the world of Star Wars to a whole different batch of creators that previously probably didn't get a chance to put their stamp on Star Wars. So I loved it. I'd love to see them do more of it. Doesn't always, all of it doesn't have to be anime, but you know, the more anime, the better in my opinion. So I'm very excited to see them hopefully do some more.
Of the 9 stories, which one was your favorite? I'm just curious as an anime fan.
I have to remember what the name was. Hold on, looking it up real quick. What was it called? I believe it was The Ninth Jedi, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, The Ninth Jedi. I really enjoyed that one. I just liked all the iconography in there, and just, you know, truly anything with. It even reminded me a little bit of Princess Mononoke with some of those scenes that are like in the forest there and the speeder bike chase. It just really hit all my check marks for what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it was for me, as somebody who's not an anime aficionado by any stretch. I've always had an interest, but never, you know, the deep dive. It was a great way to expose me to that, and since then I've watched a handful of things. I've been much more open to it. So good on Star Wars also for opening that door for others, because it's clearly been influenced by and influenced into what we've seen there. So. All right. Can you describe Star Wars in 3 words or less?
Okay. Star Wars in 3 words or less. Let me see. Daddy issues galore.
That is a good one. Yeah,
so a little reductive, but I had only a few words to work with.
Right, boiling it down to its base form.
Yes,
I love that. It continues to be a problem everywhere you look. Great. So, what is your favorite Star Wars sound effect?
That is a really good one. You know, the trite answer is probably the lightsaber igniting, but I think in recent my favorite recent Star Wars sound effect, apart from Wilhelm scream, which I will always be delighted by to no end, is the sound that the seismic charge makes. You know, we saw it recently on Book of Boba Fett. I believe it was chapter 3 or 4. It might have been chapter 4, where they drop it into the Sarlacc's gaping maw, and in Attack of the Clones as well, I believe. And it's just such a testament to what Ben Burtt and the team at Skywalker Sound are able to achieve. And that was one of the coolest things when I was researching the book, is just learning about all the stuff they would do to get these sounds, you know, like messing around with like plane engines and running them through filters, or recording animals and mixing them all together to achieve this like perfect noise. And it's honestly, every little thing in the world of Star Wars, like I just want to go back now and just listen for the sounds to see which one is going to be most satisfying. But blaster to my head, I'd probably go with the lightsaber going on, but more recently, definitely the seismic charge.
That's great, and I've said it recently, and you know, Star Wars shouldn't work, right? If you look at the 1977 film, like the crazy costumes, just special, like nothing there should have worked. But one of the things that, and as much credit as Ben Burtt gets, is I think he needs to be really brought to the fore, because without those sound effects, without there were, if they went with generic Flash Gordon-y sound effects, that it wouldn't have worked. And they've continued that tradition into even the most recent Star Wars, which is amazing. Who's your favorite Star Wars droid?
Ooh, my favorite Star Wars droid. This is definitely a hard one. As much as I love R2D2 and how sassy he gets, I might have to go with like a Gonk droid, just because they're just trying to make it through the day. Like you saw one in chapter 5 of Book of Boba Fett, who is just he's going through it. He does his part to help the Naboo starfighter get made, all just while saying his name Gonk over and over again. And I just like they're just so silly. So I like them.
And I think that's a testament to Star Wars too, that like this, I mean, it's a box with legs, and it's become a cult fan favorite. It's wild. It really is. I mean, I will admit, when I saw the Gonk droid in I think it was probably the first episode of Mandalorian, I was like, it's one of the Gonk droids.
He made it.
That's great. Which Star Wars character would you most like to be, and why?
Ooh, that is a good one. I do believe this. I think I'd like to be Max Rebo, because he has a pretty good deal. He just gets to hang out and play some sweet tunes with his pals. Sometimes he finds himself in harm's way. He may or may not be proximal to an exploding pleasure barge, or a Wookiee ripping off the arms of some Trandoshans who are being too loud at gambling. But he's just hanging out. He's got gainful employment. Everyone seems to like him. No one's like mad at Max Rebo. So look, you get a front row seat to all of these big events in the galaxy far, far away without a lot of the hassle.
I love that. That's great. Front row without the hassle. Gotta love that. That's awesome. What is your favorite Star Wars collectible that you have?
That I have? That is a good question.
And it's funny because I feel like it's a safe question, because anybody who's enough of a Star Wars fan to go on a Star Wars podcast has to have something. There's got to be.
No, for sure. And I've done a pretty good job of paring down a lot of my collectibles over the past several years. But I will say, I think my favorite collectible is right after I think I just finished the book and the first edition, and I went to Star Wars Celebration for the first time, and I was like, I want to commemorate this by getting some art. And I found this fantastic artist named Russell Walks, and he did some artwork of the original trilogy, making them look like pulp novel covers and old pulp paperback books. And I have them framed above my desk because it felt fitting. Like, I just finished a book, and I liked that they sort of reimagined these as like old books that my dad would have read when he was a kid, because he was a big sort of really loved all the old Conan the Barbarian, Doc Savage stuff, really sort of pulpy paperbacks that had been through the ringer. So I think it's probably that. That's definitely something that I always look at. It makes me smile. It's not something that necessarily super collectible, but it's nice as well because I like that it's art. It's something that just enhances my experience whenever I walk into my apartment.
That's great. I love that. That's very cool. And I think that's what's cool about Star Wars collectibles as well, as it's not always the most expensive or most valuable thing in the collection. There's something about, whether it's, one of my favorites is a friend of mine sent me an old 1977 Stormtrooper action figure. That's that's awesome. These helmets and all these other things, but that's because that brings me to that moment when I was 8 years old and I was playing in the sand pile with my toys. So, if you could own any spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe, what would be your vehicle of choice? And I'm going to take the Millennium Falcon off the table because everybody says that.
I don't want the Millennium Falcon. The maintenance on that, it always seems like it's about to explode. This is, everyone jokes about your vehicle's extended warranty. Han didn't even get a basic warranty on that thing. It's always on the verge of just blowing up. If I had to choose one, that is a good question. I might go with just because I was thinking about Knights of the Old Republic recently. I might go with the Ebon Hawk from that game because it feels cool, has a cool name, evokes the Millennium Falcon without all of the baggage that comes with that. So I'll go with the Ebon Hawk.
Wow.
But like the sensible answer would just be like a land speeder.
Sensible's boring.
Exactly. We'll go with the Ebon Hawk.
Yeah. And how exciting though was it? And if you told me 20 years ago, 15 years ago that I'd be excited to see an N1 Starfighter again. Now I always thought they looked cool and shiny and neat, but boy oh boy, seeing that come back. I mean, that's how Star Wars, the prequels they've become ingrained in the culture because we were excited to see that ship come back. So that's cool.
And they did it in a way that I thought was really cool because you have Pelimato explaining why this ship is a good choice for Mando and not just fan service, talking about, oh, this is pre-Empire, so it's going to be off the grid. And I'm like, awesome. There's a narrative reason why this makes sense for him.
Right.
And look, it's probably not ideal if people were saying like, how's he going to bring bounties in? Well, first of all, you can put a bunch of decapitated heads in the little astromech port,
right.
Or he's not going to be a bounty hunter anymore because his path is changing. So I really like that, changing that ship is also going to force him to take a different tack with how he moves forward as well.
Yeah. Yep. It was such, I mean, I always say Filoni, the way he tells stories, there's consideration. And I know he wasn't the writer on that, but obviously he's a story consultant on most of it. Yeah. That's moving the story. And that's just it. And you have a 35 to 50 minute story every week. You have to move the story forward, even if it's a subtle way, like you just said there, which is great. It's funny though, because my 9-year-old looked at the ship, was like, that was awesome, but where's he going to put his bounties? And I was like, good question.
Yeah.
Think about it. Maybe he won't.
He's not going to bring him in warm anymore. Let's just say that.
That's off the table. He's going to be like, look, I'm going to take you in cold. So
I'm going to take you in cold or flash frozen in the inky blackness of space.
Which do you prefer?
It's going to be tied to a cable behind my ship. You might bounce off a couple asteroids, but it's okay.
It's Star Wars. It's possible.
Yeah. Throw him in a back to tank. He'll be fine.
Yeah. What's your favorite Star Wars moment?
That is a really good question. I'm trying to think like what's the first thing that's coming to mind right now.
Yeah.
Favorite Star Wars moment. It might, I'm just gonna have to go the first thing I thought of, and that is when you see that first lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader, when you see like Luke looking on in horror as he sees this mysterious person basically like kill his mentor.
Right.
And it's one of those things where you really get the sense of just how high stakes everything is. And there's going to be tragedy in this movie as well, beyond even just, beyond the tragedy of seeing a planet get obliterated. It's the tragedy of seeing someone that you've cared about and that you've been invested in this movie die in front of you and in front of the character that is your way into this story. And obviously not the most impressive lightsaber duel in the series, but I think certainly the most impactful.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. Cool. I love that thought. And it is interesting how that lightsaber battle still works. I can watch that still, knowing full well that I've seen Obi-Wan and Vader fight in lava and jump over each other, and that one still works because it's just the tension that's there is so important. And that's one of those things that has evolved as the story has and hasn't gotten changed. It just has gotten more powerful, which is pretty important. The last question on this list is, what is your go-to Star Wars quote?
What is my go-to Star Wars quote? Trying to think I know what it is. I love doing the stupidest Palpatine voice possible to my friends and telling them to do it.
That's not a bad Palpatine voice.
No, you gotta workshop it a little bit. It's hard to do it cold, but it's always he's got this like very like crunchy, swampy texture to his voice. And it's just very fun to do with your friends when they least expect it.
And it's a great meme when you need to respond to things.
Exactly. Exactly. There's never a bad time for prequel Palpatine.
Oh man. And that's one of those movie moments that when I saw the film the first time, I didn't take into account how hugely important, and again, the way things work on multiple levels, it just works on multiple levels. I'll just leave it at that. Otherwise, we'll do an hour on the Rise of the Revenge of the Sith. We didn't talk much about it, but I'd love to talk if you have a couple minutes about the 100 things Star Wars fans should know and do before they die, because you also did one for Marvel. So tell us a little bit about the book and what it means, and maybe give us one or two of the 100 things that you think people need to do or know before they.
Absolutely. So the books, I was given the opportunity by the folks over at Triumph Books, this really great publishing company out of Chicago, and they previously used to do a lot of sports publishing. They still do, but they were looking to expand to the world of pop culture, and they had seen the work I had done on Nerdist and reached out to me initially about the 100 things Avengers fans should know and do before they die, which they wanted to release right up in the build up to Avengers Age of Ultron. And then after that book came out, I got the opportunity to do one for Star Wars as well, because I think when that had come out, they wanted this to come out, I believe, in the build up to originally when Force Awakens was coming out, and then I think Force Awakens, and then they wanted to do I did a second edition of that when Solo was coming out.
Okay.
So if you want to live in a world where Tony Stark and Han Solo never died and they're alive and well, these are the books for you. So while the canon of the film version might be not up to date, I tried to fill them in with the stuff that I really found fascinating, which is all of the behind the scenes stuff, like how these movies got made, the stuff that went into like how many puppeteers it took to operate Jabba the Hutt, like the silly term they give for the type of music that Max Rebo actually plays.
Right.
Just all of this stuff. I was like, okay, this is a cool opportunity to like really go deep on some of these things. Harder was figuring out the stuff to do, but some of the stuff that I thought in that capacity that I really liked is I had the privilege of visiting Rancho Obi-Wan. You mentioned Steve Sansweet earlier.
Yep.
For people out there who don't know, Rancho Obi-Wan, the largest private collection of Star Wars merchandise basically anywhere. It is a sight to behold. He gave me a tour of the place, and it was just so cool. As someone who has the collector impulse but does not have the square footage, I was on cloud nine, just seeing all of these crazy bootlegs and novels and weird pieces of promo material from all over the world. And that for people that are in California, it's based in Northern California. It's definitely, I don't know if they've reopened to the public yet, but if they have, can't recommend that enough.
Yeah. Yep. And there's also you can visit it online as well. They also have, I think they have an online membership if you want to join. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I was this is a rare opportunity for me to just brag just a little bit. I went up to I had a dinner with Steve at his house, and he was nearly completing. So I went in when it was just the one barn, and just to see it, like you said, you walk in and you just, even then, so this was before it's doubled in size, and just to walk in there is just an amazing experience. And you don't even need to be a collector. I mean, being a collector, you're like, I want that and I need that. Where can I find that? I got to get one of those. But just as a museum of Star Wars things, it's wild. So the book is available on Amazon. We'll put a link to that in the in the notes. I will definitely, and now that I know more about it, I'm definitely gonna have to pick one up. It's funny. I knew what you did for Nerdist. I didn't realize you wrote this book until we talked about getting you on the show, and then I was like, I got to get that book. So, it's at Amazon, and it's like you said, if you're also an Avengers fan, go get that one too while you're there. So Dan, where can people find you on the interwebs to keep up with you and what you're doing?
Yeah. You can find me each and every day on nerdist.com or youtube.com/nerdist. But if you want to find me personally, you can find me on Twitter at Dan Casey or on Instagram at osteoferocious, like the bone disease, but sassier.
When I found that, I laughed out loud. I thought osteoferocious is awesome. Well, Dan, thank you so much. This was a ton of fun. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day and hanging out with us and talking Star Wars.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much.
Cool. Before I hit stop, if I could get you to say, this is Dan Casey and you're listening to Around the Galaxy, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. This is Dan Casey and you're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Perfect. Let me hit this end broadcast thing here.